Beneath the polished marble of Rome lies a question that has followed humanity for centuries. What happens when knowledge is hidden, not because it is lost, but because it is locked away? Imagine a place where shelves stretch further than the eye can follow, a labyrinth of parchment, papal decrees, faded maps, and forgotten gospels. This is not a fantasy. It exists behind guarded doors in the heart of the Vatican, and for generations it has stirred both fear and fascination. Some say the archives are only a library, a treasure of preservation. Others whisper they are a fortress of silence, a vault built to protect truths too unsettling for the faithful, stories of angels who defied heaven, rulers who bent history, and myths that trace back to civilizations older than Scripture itself. What matters is not only what lies in the shadows of those corridors, but what it means for us who listen outside the locked doors. To step into this mystery is to walk along the thin line between history and legend, to hear voices that were silenced but never entirely gone. This is where our journey begins. Welcome to historic sleep. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it for you right now? I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. When you first imagine the Vatican archives, it is tempting to think of them as an ordinary library, perhaps grander than most, with gilded spines and careful order, but still simply a collection of books. Yet the deeper truth is stranger, for the archives are less like a library and more like a labyrinth, one designed to both reveal and conceal, to preserve knowledge, and to bury it in silence. Picture yourself moving through a long corridor where the light of a single lamp barely touches the edges of ancient wooden shelves. Dust rises like smoke with each step, carrying the faint scent of parchment that has endured more than 1,000 winters. The silence is heavy, not the comfortable hush of a study, but a silence that feels alive, as though the walls themselves are listening. It is here, in these endless rows, that centuries of human memory have been stored, not as open pages for all eyes, but as guarded secrets for only a few. To understand why such a place exists, we must return to the Renaissance, when the Catholic Church stood as both spiritual guide and political empire. Rome was not only a city of pilgrims and priests, but also the heart of power where kings and merchants sent their words to be recorded. Letters from far-off monarchs arrived folded in wax seals, their ink still smelling of the fireside where they had been written. Maps drawn by explorers who crossed oceans rested beside papal decrees dictating matters of faith and law. Each document was more than ink on parchment. It was a fragment of control. To collect it was to control the story of nations, and to keep it safe within walls was to ensure that only one voice, the voice of the Church, had the final say. The scribes who worked here were not ordinary clerks. They were guardians, hunched under candlelight, their quills scratching steadily across fragile vellum. Imagine the steady rhythm of ink flowing as they copied not only holy scriptures, but also foreign texts, stories from Greece, Egypt, and lands whose names were half myth to Europeans of the time. The Vatican understood that power rested not only in armies or wealth, but in memory itself. To decide what was remembered and what was forgotten was to shape the very world people believed they lived in. Outside those guarded doors, empires rose and fell. The Ottoman banners reached across continents. Spanish ships brought silver from the New World, and philosophers began to challenge the certainties of tradition. But inside, within the Vatican's growing archive, history was frozen in ink and sealed in silence. Some of the documents were mundane: lists of taxes, records of births, inventories of estates. Yet scattered among them were papers that could unsettle kingdoms, disputes between rulers, secret alliances, even testimonies that questioned the authority of Rome itself. These were not the kind of words that could be left in open libraries. They were gathered into the vault like weapons sheathed, powerful yet hidden from sight. The paradox grew with each century. The Vatican claimed to protect knowledge, yet protection often meant concealment. A scroll saved from fire might also be sealed away forever, unseen by any eyes but those allowed behind locked doors. To step into that vault was to step into a world where memory was selective, where silence carried as much weight as revelation. The question lingers: what was so dangerous about words that they had to be hidden? One answer lies in the very nature of belief. Faith thrives on unity, on shared stories that give meaning and order. But diversity of voices, conflicting accounts, strange myths preserved in fragile texts, these could fracture certainty, plant doubt where the Church demanded obedience. Thus, the archives became both a treasure house and a prison, keeping alive the very things it feared most. Walk further into the imagined corridors, and you begin to feel the tension in the air, as if each shelf whispers with voices cut short. A letter from a medieval king demanding freedom from papal taxes lies near a fragment of an apocryphal text describing angels not as radiant guardians, but as beings of terrible power who descended to earth. These are not stories easily shared with the faithful kneeling in candle-lit chapels. They raise questions that ordinary sermons cannot answer, and so they remain asleep, resting in a twilight between preservation and suppression. The world outside those walls changed again and again. Revolutions swept through Europe, empires collapsed, science redefined the heavens. But the archives endured, growing silently like a river fed by many streams. Each document that entered was a piece of history removed from the common eye, and together they became something greater than a library. They became a mirror of the world itself, but a mirror viewed only by a chosen few. For the ordinary pilgrim, the Vatican was a place of devotion, a place where marble and music lifted the heart toward heaven. Few ever knew that beneath those soaring domes, beneath the painted ceilings of Michelangelo, there stretched miles of hidden shelves carrying the voices of ages. That contrast between what was shown and what was hidden is what gives the archives their haunting power. They remind us that history is not only what we are told, but also what is withheld. Tonight, as we walk imaginatively into that darkness, the shelves seem endless. The lamplight flickers, and the air tastes of secrets. You cannot help but wonder what lies within the sealed boxes, what knowledge sleeps beneath layers of dust. Is it a harmless record of treaties long forgotten, or a scroll that could rewrite the story of creation? The power of the archives is not only in what they hold, but in what we imagine they might hold. And it is here, in this mingling of fact and possibility, that the journey truly begins, carrying us deeper into the silence where history and legend blur into one. The story of how the Vatican Archives began is not one of sudden invention, but of slow accumulation, as if time itself were pouring knowledge into a basin. In the beginning, the collection was small, little more than papal letters, decrees, and records of church councils. These were kept because they were necessary for authority, proof of decisions, proof of promises, proof of power. Yet with each century, more arrived, like tributaries feeding a river that would never stop rising. Royal families sent copies of treaties not only to be honored, but also to be witnessed by the church that stood above kings. Explorers, returning from seas barely charted, brought maps that traced outlines of continents still unknown to most of Europe. From the east came manuscripts filled with strange scripts, Greek dialogues that once shaped philosophy, Egyptian papyri, speaking of gods who ruled before the world of Christ. Each piece entered the vault not simply as knowledge, but as weight, as evidence that the Vatican was weaving together the memory of humanity under its roof. Imagine the scribes of the Renaissance, their robes brushing the cold stone floor as they bent over tables of oak. Their hands were steady, even as the world outside swirled with conflict. While empires traded cannon fire and peasants tilled fields, inside those chambers the quills scratched on, preserving the words of a past no one else would see. They copied fragile scrolls line by line, for the originals were too precious to leave exposed. A single mistake meant a meaning could vanish. The pressure of their task must have felt immense, for to them, each stroke of ink was not only preservation, but also selection. They knew some works would be hidden, sealed for centuries, perhaps never to be read again. In the flicker of candlelight, they were not only scribes, they were silent judges of history. Outside the Vatican walls, knowledge was spreading in dangerous new ways. The invention of the printing press meant that words could no longer be fully contained, and books multiplied like sparks leaping from a fire. Luther's theses nailed to a church door shook Europe with questions of faith and authority. Suddenly, belief was not handed down only from pulpits. It could be read, argued, and even rejected. The Vatican responded with both vigilance and silence. While some books were condemned and burned in public squares, others were gathered quietly into the archives, locked away where their influence would fade into dust. The paradox was sharp. The Church was both preserver and censor, protector of words, and their jailer. The expansion of the archive reflected this tension. For every harmless list of taxes or births, there was another text too dangerous to share openly. Some manuscripts contained theological disputes that hinted at alternative visions of salvation. Others spoke of visions and prophecies outside the official canon. And there were whispers of even stranger works, writings that traced humanity's origins not only to the Garden of Eden, but to older myths, where angels walked as men and giants rose from the union of heaven and earth. The Vatican did not destroy these texts. To burn them would be to erase memory, and even those deemed heretical carried value as witness. But to allow them into the hands of common believers would risk chaos. So they were preserved in silence, bound in leather, placed in sealed boxes, where only the chosen would ever glance at their pages. Walk through this imagined labyrinth, and you begin to sense the scale of the undertaking. Letters written in Chinese script rest near parchments from medieval France. A fragment of Aristotle lies beside the decree of a forgotten pope. Maps drawn by Moorish cartographers are folded near sketches of the New World, drawn by sailors whose names are barely remembered. In these shelves, the world was gathered together, cultures that had never met now pressed side by side in binding and ink. It is as if the Church had stitched a hidden book of humanity, one that ordinary eyes would never read, yet one that shaped the decisions of those who ruled both crown and altar. But with this gathering came questions that echo still. Why preserve what was forbidden? Why keep in Rome the voices declared unworthy of the faithful? Perhaps the answer is survival. To endure, the Church needed to understand every threat, every rival idea, every myth that could compete with its authority. To destroy them was to forget them. To lock them away was to control them. The archives became not only memory, but strategy, a fortress built of paper and parchment, where ideas could be contained as safely as prisoners behind stone walls. Centuries passed, and still the archive grew. Each generation of scribes added new layers, stacking voices of the past like geological strata. And as the collection thickened, it began to take on a life of its own, a presence that scholars whispered about but rarely saw. For entry was almost impossible. Only a few trusted individuals were allowed to study within its walls, and even they were often limited to specific documents chosen for them. The rest lay untouched, unseen for centuries. To the world outside, the archive was no longer just a collection of books. It had become a legend. Legends have a way of growing in silence. The less people knew, the more they imagined. Some spoke of secret gospels hidden away to protect doctrine. Others whispered of ancient maps showing lands before Columbus ever sailed. There were rumors of scrolls that told of civilizations lost to flood and fire, texts that tied biblical angels to the watchers of old myths, writings that blurred the line between scripture and story. No proof was ever given, but the mere possibility was enough to spark fascination. The silence of the Vatican made the legends stronger, for in absence of answers, imagination filled the gaps. Picture a traveler arriving in Rome in the 17th century, hearing of these mysterious vaults while walking through the grandeur of St. Peter's Basilica, the soaring dome above, the incense rising, the choir's voices echoing through marble. These were open signs of faith. Yet beneath, hidden behind guarded doors, stretched miles of shelves where voices whispered unseen. To that traveler, the thought must have been intoxicating, that the greatest library of the world was hidden in plain sight, sealed not by lack of books but by abundance, drowned in the silence of secrecy. And so the archive became a paradox at the heart of Rome, both treasure and prison, memory and silence. It preserved humanity's story, but only on its own terms. To this day, the paradox lingers. Was the Church protecting knowledge from destruction, or protecting itself from the knowledge? The answer may never be certain. Yet in the flicker of an oil lamp across a manuscript no one has read for 500 years, you can almost hear the whisper of a past that refuses to fade. This is the power of the archive, not only in what it reveals but in what it withholds, reminding us that history is not merely what survives, but what is chosen to survive. And in that choice lies the mystery that keeps us walking deeper into its silent corridors. If the archive was merely a collection of old records, its silence might feel ordinary, like the stillness of a neglected library. But there is a difference between forgotten and forbidden. What gives the Vatican's hidden shelves their strange aura is not only what they contain, but what they deliberately conceal. Among the thousands of volumes preserved inside are texts known as the Apocrypha, writings that once circulated in the early centuries of Christianity, but were later cast aside, declared unsuitable for the faithful. The very word Apocrypha means hidden, and that is precisely what they became, sealed away, untouched, while the official scriptures were spread across the world. Imagine a fragile scroll unrolled on a wooden desk, the ink faded but still legible, telling a story of Adam and Eve not as sinners cast out in shame, but as seekers of secret wisdom, reaching for knowledge that might bring them closer to the divine. Such an image is dazzling, almost dangerous, for it suggests that humanity's first act was not simply disobedience, but a hunger for enlightenment. To the guardians of the Church, this was a perilous vision, one that could fracture the unity of doctrine. And so the scroll was set aside, copied perhaps once for record, then locked in silence. Other texts spoke of angels who were not only messengers, but beings of immense power, descending to earth in visions of light and shadow. Some of these stories hinted at cosmic battles unseen, struggles between forces of heaven and those cast down. They were poetic, mythic, and filled with imagery that stirred the imagination. But they also threatened to complicate the clean lines of the official canon. The Church feared confusion, and confusion could lead to doubt. Better, they thought, that such stories remain hidden. Among the most haunting of these writings is the Book of Enoch, a text that describes angels called watchers, who looked upon humanity and chose to walk among them, teaching secrets of the stars, of weapons, of forbidden knowledge. It speaks of giants born from the union of heaven and earth, the Nephilim, beings of great strength feared by mankind and judged by God. For early Christians, such a text offered a vision of creation far wider than the familiar Genesis. It suggested that the universe was filled with beings whose actions shaped human destiny. To include it in the canon would have been to open faith to vast and unsettling horizons. To exclude it was to narrow the story into one that could be held in a single voice. And so Enoch, though cherished by some, was sealed away, a whisper of what might have been. The Apocrypha carried more than myth. Some contained intimate conversations, secret sayings of Jesus passed in hushed voices from disciple to disciple. One fragment tells of him shaping birds out of clay and breathing life into them as a child, a story both wondrous and troubling, for it portrays divinity in playful, almost human form. Another offers cryptic parables that place the search for truth not in the authority of priests, but in the heart of every believer. Such messages, though inspiring, could be dangerous. They gave power to the individual rather than the institution. And for a church struggling to hold unity, unity meant survival. As centuries passed, these forbidden texts became shadows within the archives. Scholars debated their existence, travelers whispered of them, but few ever saw their pages. In silence, they grew more powerful. Stories denied often carry more weight than stories told. A book declared forbidden becomes not less intriguing but more. To this day, the very idea that the Vatican holds such writings, preserved but unseen, sparks imagination. What else might lie there, sealed away not because it was false, but because it was too true for comfort? Picture yourself again in that dim corridor, a locked chest before you. Inside lies a book untouched for 500 years. Its words might echo with voices of visionaries who dared to dream differently about the divine. They might offer images of heaven and earth, bound in ways both wondrous and unsettling. The Church believed such visions could fracture the faithful, but to the seeker, they are windows into a broader world. Each page is not simply text, but a challenge, asking, what if the story of salvation was larger than we were told? The paradox deepens. By preserving what they forbade, the Vatican ensured that these voices, though silenced, never fully died. Like seeds buried deep in soil, they waited. And when fragments of the Apocrypha were rediscovered centuries later, they burst again into the light, their voices startling modern readers with their beauty and strangeness. The Dead Sea scrolls uncovered in the caves of Qumran, the Nag Hammadi texts found in Egypt. These discoveries reminded the world that Christianity in its early centuries was not one simple story, but a chorus of many voices. Some exalted Christ as divine light, others as a teacher of riddles, still others as a bearer of hidden wisdom. The canon chose 4 Gospels, but countless others whispered from the shadows. What does it mean that these voices were silenced? Perhaps it means that unity demanded sacrifice, that the safety of one story required the burial of many. But it also means that history itself is shaped by what is hidden. The Vatican Archives embody this truth, their shelves heavy not only with preservation, but with absence, with words withheld. To walk through them in imagination is to hear not only the voices that survive, but also the echo of those that were hushed. In this way, the Apocrypha are not merely texts. They are questions disguised as books. Questions about what faith might have been if the boundaries were wider, if the stories of angels, giants, secret wisdom, and intimate parables had been part of the official scripture. Questions about whether belief must be uniform to survive, or whether it can live in the richness of diversity. And questions about ourselves, about why the forbidden draws us closer than the accepted, why we lean into whispers even more than proclamations. As you leave this imagined chamber, the silence grows heavier. The forbidden texts lie behind you, yet their presence lingers, a reminder that the story of faith is never only what is written on open pages, but also what sleeps behind closed ones. And as you step deeper into the labyrinth, another shadow awaits, the Gospels themselves, not lost by accident, but silenced by choice. Voices of Thomas, of Mary, of Judas, voices that might have changed the course of Christianity had they been allowed to speak. The path ahead grows darker, but the whispers grow louder, calling you further into the mystery. The silence of the Apocrypha is only the beginning. Beyond those hidden scrolls lie other voices, ones that were not simply set aside as myth or poetry, but silenced because they challenged the very structure of belief. These are the lost Gospels, texts written in the same early centuries as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, yet excluded from the official story that came to define Christianity. To imagine them is to imagine a different faith, a faith that might have looked inward, honored unexpected voices, or even reversed the roles of hero and villain. And to know they exist, perhaps preserved deep within the Vatican's vaults, is to realize that what we call history is often a choice rather than a fate. The Gospel of Thomas is one of the most striking of these lost voices. Unlike the familiar Gospels that describe miracles, crucifixion, and resurrection, Thomas offers no narrative at all. Instead, it gathers secret sayings of Jesus, short, almost puzzle-like, as though intended for those who would wrestle with them in silence. One of its most haunting lines declares, "The kingdom is inside you, and it is outside you." Such words sound simple, yet they carry a weight that could undermine the authority of an entire institution. If the divine lives within, then priests and bishops lose their monopoly on access to truth. Faith becomes not obedience to a hierarchy, but a personal journey, a discovery made within the soul of every individual. For the early church, struggling to unify a scattered world of believers, such a message was explosive. To preserve unity, the Gospel of Thomas was left behind, buried in silence. Another voice rises from the shadows in the Gospel of Mary. Mary Magdalene, long remembered as a follower, here appears not as a background figure, but as a teacher, a bearer of secret visions entrusted to her directly by Christ. She speaks of the soul rising beyond darkness, of wisdom granted not through institutions, but through intimacy with the divine. Yet in a world ruled by men, this vision was too dangerous. To acknowledge Mary as teacher was to destabilize the hierarchy of apostles, to grant authority to a woman in a tradition dominated by male voices. The Church Fathers, debating what was to be canon, turned away from her words. Her gospel slipped into silence, fragments surviving only in scattered sands until rediscovered centuries later. To imagine her scroll resting within the Vatican Archives is to imagine a road not taken, a Christianity where women could speak and be heard, where wisdom flowed through unexpected voices. Even more unsettling is the Gospel of Judas. For 2,000 years, Judas has been the figure of betrayal, the one who sold his master for silver, the villain whose kiss sealed the crucifixion. Yet in this text, he is not a traitor, but a chosen one, carrying out a role necessary for salvation. He is not condemned but entrusted, not damned but essential. Such a reversal shakes the foundation of the story itself. If Judas was chosen, then sacrifice takes on a new meaning, and betrayal becomes obedience to a divine plan. For the guardians of the canon, this was unthinkable. Faith cannot rest on ambiguity. It demands clarity. And so Judas's voice was erased, his gospel hidden. Fragments of it surfaced only in modern times, and yet whispers persist that older, more complete versions may still rest in the Vatican's shadows, their pages waiting for eyes brave enough to read. These are not the only lost Gospels. Some told stories of Jesus as a child performing small miracles, moments of wonder that never reached the official narrative. Others gave voices to disciples who carried secret wisdom in private, teachings not meant for crowds but for the few. Together they painted a picture of early Christianity that was wide and diverse, filled with competing visions and layered truths. To choose only 4 Gospels was to narrow a river into a single channel, to declare one version of the story as the only version. Yet the echoes of those silenced Gospels never truly died. Consider the process of choosing the canon itself. Bishops and councils gathered, debated, and argued over which texts would carry the weight of eternity. Each decision was a choice, and each choice left something behind. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Judas, and many others fell into silence, yet their exclusion gave them power. People asked, why were these voices silenced? What truths were too sharp, too strange, too disruptive to be heard. The absence became presence, and legends grew in the shadows. To step imaginatively into the Vatican archives is to stand at the crossroads of these choices. Picture a scholar of the 17th century, one of the rare few allowed within, pulling a fragile manuscript from a shelf. The ink is faint, the script foreign, the story unlike anything in the official Bible. He reads of Thomas, of Mary, of Judas, and for a moment his faith trembles. What he holds in his hand is not heresy, not invention, but another voice from the same time, another way of seeing. Does he report it? Does he copy it? Or does he return it to silence, fearing what it might mean for his world? The lost Gospels remind us that faith is not a single thread, but a tapestry, woven from many strands. Some were cut, others preserved, and the pattern we see today is only one of many that could have been. Their existence challenges us to imagine alternatives, to see that the history of belief is not inevitable, but chosen. Perhaps this is why they still haunt us. They ask questions that official answers cannot fully silence. As you walk deeper into the imagined corridors of the Vatican, the weight of these choices presses like the heavy air of a sealed chamber. The lost Gospels rest unseen, yet their whispers reach us still. They tell us that truth is never simple, that what we know as history is shaped by decisions made long ago. They remind us that even silence carries meaning, that absence can speak louder than presence. And they ask us quietly what we would have believed if those other voices had been allowed to sing. The journey does not end here, for beyond the Gospels lie legends even stranger, myths older than Christianity itself, stories of giants, of watchers in the sky, of gods remembered as men and men remembered as gods. Whispers say the Vatican holds fragments of these too, myths so ancient and so haunting that they blur the boundary between scripture and folklore. To step toward them is to step not only into hidden history, but into the realm where myth and faith merge into mystery. And so, with the Gospels fading into silence, the path bends toward something older, stranger, and perhaps more dangerous still. Beyond the silence of lost Gospels lies a darker corridor, one that leads not to familiar figures of Christianity, but to myths older than the Church itself. These are the stories that scholars hesitate to name, for they cross the boundary between scripture and legend, history and imagination. Whispers say the Vatican archives shelter fragments of these myths, texts carried from Babylon, Sumer, or forgotten corners of the ancient world, translated into Latin by careful scribes who copied each strange symbol under the glow of oil lamps. Whether preserved out of curiosity or out of fear, the presence of such stories would alter how we see the foundations of faith. Among the most haunting of these tales is the account of the Nephilim. In the book of Genesis, they are mentioned only briefly, giants born of the union between the sons of God and the daughters of men. But in apocryphal texts and ancient commentaries, they loom larger, described as beings of immense strength who walked the earth before the flood. Imagine them not as fairy-tale giants, but as towering figures whose size and knowledge set them apart, half divine and half mortal, inspiring awe and dread in those who lived beside them. Some traditions describe them as destroyers, consuming the land with their power. Others see them as teachers, bearers of secrets not meant for human hands. To the faithful, such images were dangerous, for they complicated the neat order of heaven above and humanity below. To preserve them was risky, yet to destroy them was to erase a part of the story. And so the safest choice was silence. Connected to the Nephilim are the Watchers, angels who, according to the Book of Enoch, looked upon humanity with longing and chose to descend to earth. They taught men how to fashion weapons, women how to adorn themselves with precious stones, and all people how to read the stars. These were gifts of knowledge, but knowledge came with cost. For with weapons came war, with adornment came vanity, with secrets of the stars came pride. The Watchers were judged, cast down, yet their story lingered. Some believed their offspring were the giants, the Nephilim, who carried the legacy of forbidden union. To hold such a tale within the Vatican's walls would be to acknowledge that heaven itself had fissures, that divine beings could fall and mingle with mortals. To release it into the hands of the faithful could unravel certainty, and so the story was buried, preserved in silence but never erased. Even older are the myths of the Anunnaki, the gods of Mesopotamia, whose names echo across cuneiform tablets. They were described as powerful deities descending from the heavens, shaping cities, granting wisdom, demanding loyalty. Some modern interpreters see them as metaphors for the forces of nature, while others imagine them as visitors from beyond the stars, sky beings whose presence on Earth inspired legends later absorbed into biblical tradition. Picture a Babylonian tablet carried by traders into Rome, its wedge-shaped marks carefully copied by a scribe into Latin. On the surface, it is myth, yet beneath the surface lies a dangerous question. Were these ancient gods entirely separate from the angels and watchers spoken of in Scripture, or were they part of the same tapestry, threads woven from different cultures into one hidden fabric? To include such a tablet openly would blur the lines between Christianity and pagan myth. But to hide it would be to admit that the stories existed, that the echoes of other civilizations had reached Rome and demanded attention. In this shadowed corridor of the imagination, the Vatican Archive becomes not just a Christian vault, but a storehouse of humanity's deepest legends. Maps are said to lie there, showing continents unknown to medieval Europe, drawn with uncanny accuracy. Some whisper that these charts include details of Antarctica long before its discovery, or star maps showing constellations invisible to the naked eye. Such rumors may be nothing more than fantasy, yet the silence of the Vatican makes them powerful. For if deserts and caves could hide treasures like the Dead Sea Scrolls, why not locked vaults in Rome? Picture a monk of the 15th century, unfolding such a map under the glow of a lantern. His eyes widen at the outline of a land he has never heard of, a continent drawn with confidence, centuries before explorers set sail. Does he believe it? Does he fear it? Perhaps he copies it, tucks it back into its case, and says nothing. For to reveal it would raise questions the world wasn't ready to ask. The myths preserved in silence tell us something about humanity itself. We are drawn to stories of beings greater than ourselves, whether angels, gods, or visitors from the sky. They remind us of our longing for connection with the divine, our fear of forces beyond control, and our fascination with forbidden knowledge. The Vatican's choice to keep such stories hidden may not have been only about control, but about protection. Protection from ideas too heavy for fragile faith. Protection from questions that could unravel certainty. yet in hiding them, they ensured those myths never died. In darkness, stories grow. Even today, the thought of giants walking the earth, of watchers teaching secret arts, of sky gods descending among men, captures imagination. We see them in films, novels, and theories that blur archaeology with legend. They survive not because we know them, but because we sense them, lingering just beyond the edge of history. The Vatican's silence makes them stronger, for absence invites speculation. The locked door becomes more powerful than an open one. As you walk further into the imagined vault, you hear the echo of these legends pressing from the shelves. Each scroll, each fragment, is a voice from a time when myth and history were not separate, but one. To touch them would be to step into a world where heaven and earth mingled freely, where giants strode, angels fell, and gods whispered secrets to mortals. Such a world feels both terrifying and strangely familiar, for it reflects our eternal hunger to know what lies beyond. And yet, even as these myths swirl in silence, another layer of the archive awaits, one not of ancient giants or star beings, but of human choice, of censorship, of deliberate erasure, of words judged too dangerous to live. For alongside the preservation of myths lies another story, the story of fire and silence, of books condemned to flames or buried in hidden chests. This is the story of censorship. And it is the next corridor in our journey where silence is not only mystery, but weapon. Silence can take many forms. Sometimes it is the silence of dust on forgotten shelves, but other times it is the silence of fire, sudden and absolute, erasing words in the curl of smoke. To understand the Vatican archives is to understand that preservation and destruction walk hand in hand. For what the Church chose to keep hidden in vaults, it also sometimes chose to burn. The history of censorship is written not only in secret boxes, but in ashes. Picture a courtyard in Renaissance Rome. The air is sharp, and the crowd presses close. A pile of manuscripts is stacked high, their parchment edges curling like dried leaves. Monks chant prayers as the flames are lit, and the ink begins to blister, words dissolving into black smoke that rises toward the sky. To burn a book is to silence it completely, to deny it even the possibility of a whisper. For the Church, this act was not cruelty, but survival. Unity of belief was fragile, and one book with dangerous words could fracture it. Better to destroy the book than to risk the soul of the faithful. But censorship was not always so dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, like a decree issued from a bishop's chamber, instructing that a certain text should never be read. Sometimes it was subtle, a manuscript quietly removed from a monastery library and placed in a sealed chest. In this way, books could vanish without spectacle, erased not by fire, but by silence. To the world outside, they simply ceased to exist. Inside the archives, they survived, preserved but unseen, their voices hushed by command. In the 16th century, censorship took on a new weapon, the Index of Forbidden Books. This was no ordinary list. It was a map of silence, a record of ideas deemed too dangerous for Catholic eyes. Great thinkers found their names written there: Erasmus, Galileo, Descartes. To appear on the index was to be erased from the faithful mind, your words declared poison, your thoughts branded as contagion. And yet, paradoxically, this erasure gave the books a strange power. A banned book becomes not less appealing, but more. Readers sought them in secret, hiding them under cloaks, passing them from hand to hand as if they were contraband treasures. In the act of silencing, the Church often gave greater life to the very ideas it feared. Consider Galileo, whose writings suggested that the earth moved around the sun. To the ordinary eye, this was not blasphemy, but observation, a truth written in the sky itself. Yet for the Church, it threatened the unity of Scripture, the stability of tradition. To admit his vision was to admit that the universe was wider and stranger than the pulpit declared. His books were condemned, his words silenced. But history did not forget. Today, Galileo's name shines brighter than the names of those who silenced him, his ideas rising like stars that no decree can extinguish. The archives still hold the records of his trial, the testimonies, the defenses, the carefully written condemnations. To read them is to feel the weight of silence as a tool, wielded not only against heresy, but against imagination itself. For censorship was not confined to theology. Painters were told which images could appear on church walls, sculptors instructed on how saints must look, composers warned about which notes carried dangerous connotations. The hand of censorship stretched into every corner of human creativity. It was not just words that were silenced, but visions, sounds, dreams. Yet silence has a strange quality. It never truly endures. A forbidden manuscript hidden in the Vatican might sleep for centuries, but it is never gone. A banned book burned in a square might still survive in another copy smuggled away. The act of suppression is itself an admission of power, a recognition that words can move mountains, that ideas can shift the world. The more fiercely they are silenced, the louder they seem to echo across time. Imagine walking once more into the vault, shelves heavy with volumes whose spines bear no titles, whose bindings are plain, hiding the secrets within. Some of them were saved from fire at the last moment, others placed here as punishment, their very presence a reminder of the Church's fear. To touch one is to feel history trembling in your hands, for it is not only ink and parchment, but the shadow of choices made, voices hushed, truths judged too sharp to be spoken. Censorship was never only about the past, it was about the future. By controlling which books were read, the Church shaped which ideas would take root in minds yet unborn. To silence a book was to attempt to silence generations. And yet time shows that silence is never perfect. Whispers survive, fragments return, the lost becomes rediscovered. The past, though buried, rises again like grass through stone. Perhaps this is why the Vatican chose not to destroy everything. Some works, though forbidden, were locked away rather than burned. To eliminate them would be to eliminate memory. And even the Church understood that forgetting can be more dangerous than remembering. By hiding them, the Church became both jailer and guardian, preserving the very diversity it condemned. The paradox endures. The Vatican archives are both prison and sanctuary, a place where dangerous ideas survive by being silenced. Think again of the Index of Forbidden Books. For centuries it was updated, expanded, and enforced, until it became one of the most powerful instruments of control in Europe. And then, in the modern age, it was abolished, its lists dissolved into history. But the shadow of its silence remains. We still remember the names written there, the ideas once condemned. And we wonder, are they all truly free now? Or do some still rest behind those locked Vatican doors, unlisted but unspoken, preserved but untouchable? As you step back from this imagined chamber of silence, the air feels heavier, thick with smoke that lingers even when the flames are gone. The story of censorship is not only a story of the Church. It is a story of humanity's struggle with fear, with control, with the dangerous power of imagination. It shows us that words are never just words. They are sparks, and sparks, once lit, will find their way into the world, no matter how many times they are smothered. And so, as we leave behind the shelves of forbidden books, another echo calls from the vault. Not all accepted silence, not all bowed to the decree of erasure. Throughout history, there were those who dared to ask the forbidden questions, who whispered truths when shouting would have meant death. They were scholars, seekers, and heretics, voices that risked everything to keep ideas alive. Their footsteps, too, linger in the Vatican's hidden halls, and their story is the next chapter in our journey. Not everyone accepted the silence. For every book condemned, for every decree that sought to bury voices in darkness, there were men and women who chose to resist. Some resisted openly and paid with exile or death. Others resisted quietly, with ink hidden under robes, with whispers passed only to trusted ears. They were the heretics, though the word itself is misleading. Heresy did not always mean falsehood. Sometimes it meant courage, the willingness to see differently when all of society demanded conformity. To trace their footsteps is to walk through a shadowed corridor of human history where faith, reason, and imagination collided with power. Imagine a monk in a monastery library long after midnight when the rest of the brothers have gone to sleep. He lights a candle, pulls a scroll from a chest, and begins to copy it by hand. He knows it has been forbidden, knows discovery would mean punishment, perhaps worse. But the hunger to preserve the words outweighs his fear. Each line he copies is an act of defiance, each letter a spark against the heavy darkness of silence. Such anonymous figures, scribes who risked everything, are forgotten by name, but remembered in the survival of the very texts the Church tried to erase. Without them, entire worlds of thought would have vanished forever. Others resisted not with secrecy, but with questions asked aloud. Giordano Bruno was one of these. A Dominican friar turned philosopher, he dared to imagine that the universe had no center, that the stars were suns like our own, each surrounded by endless worlds. In his vision, creation was not a small theater with Earth at its center, but an infinite expanse alive with countless possibilities. To the Church, such thoughts were intolerable. Infinity left too little room for control. Bruno was tried, condemned, and in 1600 burned at the stake. Yet his ideas survived, echoing louder after his death than they had in life. The archives still hold the records of his trial, testimonies scrawled in ink that tremble with the tension between authority and imagination. To read them today is to hear his voice rise again, daring, defiant, refusing to be silenced. Galileo, too, became a symbol of heresy. Armed not with myth, but with a telescope, he turned his eyes to the heavens and saw moons circling Jupiter, phases of Venus, evidence that the Earth was not the still center of creation, but a planet moving in a vast dance. His discoveries were simple observations, yet they shattered centuries of certainty. The Church summoned him, questioned him, demanded recantation. He was silenced, placed under house arrest, his books condemned. But his vision of the cosmos lived on, spreading like starlight across generations. To walk through the Vatican's archives and glimpse the records of his trial is to feel the pulse of that moment when truth collided with power, when a single man's gaze at the night sky changed the story of the universe. Heresy was not only about science, it was also about faith itself. Some dared to ask why certain Gospels were excluded, why the words of Mary or Thomas were silenced. Others questioned rituals, questioned the necessity of priests, questioned whether faith could live in diversity instead of uniformity. To the guardians of order, such questions were dangerous. Yet to those who asked them, they felt natural, even necessary. In whispered conversations in monasteries, in secret gatherings in candlelit rooms, believers explored these questions, risking condemnation for the sake of curiosity. Heresy, then, is not only rebellion, it is also longing. It is the human desire to sigh beyond the walls, to touch the forbidden, to ask what lies behind silence. The archives preserve fragments of this struggle. Letters from inquisitors, records of trials, denunciations written in trembling hands. Each document is more than testimony. It is an echo of courage, a reminder that silence never fully erases. Ideas suppressed in one age return in another, reshaped but alive. Picture a village rumor passed from one generation to the next. That a priest once discovered a scroll hidden in the church walls, that he read words never heard in Sunday sermons, that he spoke them only once before vanishing. No written record survives, but the story lingers in whispers. Such tales may be smoke, but smoke always suggests fire. In them we glimpse the courage of the ordinary, the farmer who wonders quietly about the fairness of salvation, the mother who asks why her child cannot read the scriptures for herself, the traveler who claims to have glimpsed texts long hidden. These are not names written in history books, yet their questions belong to the same current of heresy that flows through the ages. The Vatican called them dangerous, and perhaps they were, for questions can be more powerful than answers. Questions grow, spread, multiply. They spark imagination. They weaken fear. In the silence of forbidden books, questions find fertile soil, for what is withheld often becomes more compelling than what is given. The heretics were not only rebels, but mirrors, reflecting the unspoken doubts of countless others. The paradox is that in punishing heresy, the Church ensured its survival. Bruno's flames lit his ideas brighter. Galileo's silencing spread his vision wider. Each act of suppression became also an act of preservation, for history remembers those who were condemned. Their words, sealed in trial records or whispered through rumor, carry further than they might have in ordinary acceptance. The Vatican's hidden shelves are filled not only with books, but with echoes of those voices, frozen in parchment, yet alive in memory. And so the whispers of heresy linger, not as shouts of rebellion, but as quiet murmurings that refuse to die. They remind us that faith and reason have always walked side by side, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in conflict. They show us that silence cannot erase curiosity, that ideas once born cannot be killed. They wait, they linger, they return. To walk through the imagined corridors of the Vatican is to feel those whispers brushing against your ear, asking questions that still matter. What was hidden? What was feared? What was too dangerous to believe? As you leave this chamber of heresy, you sense a shift. The voices of Bruno, Galileo, and countless unnamed rebels have left their mark. But the vault doesn't end here. Ahead lies another passage, one lit not by flames of condemnation, but by the glow of discovery. For in the modern world, buried scrolls began to rise again, unearthed from deserts and caves, revealing voices long thought lost. The 20th century brought a new chapter to the story, when silence was broken not by defiance but by chance, when clay jars and hidden caves gave back to the world what had been buried for 2,000 years. The silence that surrounded the archives seemed unbreakable for centuries, but the modern world is filled with surprises, and sometimes chance itself shatters what has been buried. In the middle of the 20th century, far from the marble halls of Rome, silence cracked open in the Egyptian desert. Near the town of Nag Hammadi in 1945, a farmer digging for soil stumbled upon clay jars sealed for nearly 2,000 years. Inside, wrapped in linen, were ancient manuscripts that scholars would later call the Nag Hammadi Library. To open them was to hear voices long silenced, to glimpse a Christianity more diverse and complex than the one shaped by the canon. The texts included the Gospel of Thomas, with its haunting sayings, and the Gospel of Philip, with reflections that hinted at mysteries of union between the human and the divine. There were treatises filled with visions, dialogues where Jesus spoke in riddles, passages that felt closer to philosophy than doctrine. To read them was to step into an early world of faith where diversity was not an accident, but the norm. Some communities saw salvation as knowledge, others as vision, others as harmony with cosmic forces. The discovery shook scholars, not because it created heresy, but because it reminded the world that heresy had always been part of the story, written in ink long before councils erased it. Imagine the astonishment of the first researchers who touched those fragile pages. The papyrus crumbled at the edges, yet the words within still burned with life. For centuries they had slept in silence, while the Vatican guarded its own vaults in secrecy. Now suddenly, the world had proof that Christianity was once a chorus of voices, many of them silenced, but never entirely lost. The parallels to the forbidden texts rumored in the Vatican were impossible to ignore. If such treasures could sleep in jars beneath desert sand, what might lie behind the locked doors of Rome? 2 years later, another discovery deepened the mystery. In 1947, in the caves near Qumran by the Dead Sea, a Bedouin shepherd stumbled upon scrolls hidden in clay jars. These were older than any biblical texts known at the time, some written centuries before the rise of the Church. They included psalms, rules of ancient communities, fragments of scripture preserved by a group sometimes called the Essenes, who lived apart from the world, guarding their texts like treasures of light. The Dead Sea Scrolls carried the voices of a people standing at the edge of history, a bridge between the world of Israel and the dawn of Christianity. To read them today is to step back 2 millennia, to touch prayers written before cathedrals rose, before popes reigned, before councils debated. They show us a world of hope and fear, of communities waiting for divine deliverance, of rituals and laws that shaped how faith was lived. Their discovery forced scholars to rethink the Bible itself, to see that the scriptures we know are only part of a larger mosaic of belief. Once again, questions stirred. If deserts and caves could hide such treasures, What then might be hidden in the Vatican's endless shelves? Imagine the unease in Rome as these discoveries captured the world's attention. Scholars in Europe and America studied the fragments, published translations, debated meanings. The air buzzed with excitement, but also with suspicion. If such texts had survived in remote deserts, surely others existed in Rome, preserved not by chance but by design. The Vatican gave no answer. Its silence spoke louder than words. And in that silence, imagination grew louder still. For those who walked the line between faith and curiosity, the discoveries of Nag Hammadi and Qumran were both exhilarating and unsettling. They revealed that history is not tidy. It is layered, complicated, filled with voices that argue, contradict, and dream. They showed that Christianity was not born as a single voice, but as a storm of many voices, some rising, some silenced. And they raised the haunting question: what else waits, still hidden? Picture again the Vatican archive, its locked doors untouched by centuries. Within, perhaps, rest scrolls like those found in the desert, but older, more complete, untouched by time. Perhaps translations of the same Gospels, or even works that have never been seen. A single fragment could shift the understanding of Scripture. A single line could rewrite the story of salvation. To think of them sleeping in silence while scholars search deserts is to feel both frustration and wonder, for the mystery itself is part of their power. But rediscovery is not only about the texts themselves, it is about what they mean for us. The Nag Hammadi manuscripts and the Dead Sea Scrolls remind us that truth never fully dies. It may be hidden, silenced, or forgotten, but it waits. It waits in clay jars, in caves, in chests sealed by papal decree. And when the moment comes, it returns, reshaping our story. The 20th century brought these voices back. Yet even as the world celebrated, the Vatican's silence grew heavier. Scholars began to compare, to speculate. Could the archives hold their own collection of scrolls, perhaps even versions of these same discoveries, guarded for centuries? Was the Church not only the preserver of forbidden texts, but also the custodian of a parallel library of hidden gospels and prophecies? No answer was given, and so imagination filled the void. What matters is not only the documents themselves, but the reminder they bring. History is alive. It is not a fixed line, but a living tapestry, woven from fragments, rediscovered piece by piece. Each scroll found in sand, each fragment pulled from ash, each manuscript glimpsed behind Vatican walls is a thread in that tapestry. Together they show us that the story of faith is never complete, never final. It is always unfolding, always waiting for the next voice to rise. As you leave behind the desert caves of Qumran and the jars of Nag Hammadi in imagination, you step back into the vault of Rome. The silence is heavier now, for you know what silence can conceal. And ahead, in that silence, lies another corridor, one not only of rediscovery, but of speculation. For beyond what has been found, there are theories of what might still exist, legends of lost civilizations, of forgotten technologies, of relics that blur the line between myth and history. If the Vatican holds such secrets, they would not only reshape the past, but bend the future itself. Speculation thrives where silence remains. The Vatican has never opened all its shelves to the world, and in that closed space, imagination takes root like vines in shadow. For centuries, people have whispered not only of gospels and scrolls, but of stranger treasures, maps of lands that should not have been known, relics tied to myths older than Christianity, even records of civilizations erased from memory. These are theories, legends, perhaps fantasies, yet they endure because absence itself invites belief. A locked door becomes a canvas upon which every dream, every fear can be painted. Among the most enduring of these legends is the tale that the archives hold records of Atlantis. Plato's account of a mighty island swallowed by the sea has fascinated minds for more than 2 millennia. Most dismiss it as allegory, yet the possibility of a real lost civilization lingers. Some imagine that within the Vatican walls lie scrolls carried from ancient Greece, or even earlier, describing lands across the ocean known long before Columbus set sail. To hold such documents would be to hold evidence that humanity's story is far older and stranger than we believe. Whether the Vatican preserves them to protect faith or to guard the world from unsettling truths, no one can say. But the very idea that a record of Atlantis lies hidden in Rome is enough to keep the legend alive. Other theories speak not of lost lands, but of forbidden machines. Ancient texts from India tell of flying vimanas, chariots of the gods that moved across the skies. Greek myths speak of fire stolen from heaven, weapons of light wielded by Zeus. To some, these are metaphors. To others, they are memories of technologies long forgotten. Whispers say that the Vatican may hold fragments connecting these myths, perhaps diagrams or commentaries suggesting they were more than stories. Imagine a manuscript in Latin describing a machine that could fly, copied from a Sanskrit original by a scribe who barely understood what he transcribed. To the modern world, it would seem astonishing. To the Vatican, it would seem dangerous, for to reveal it might shatter both scripture and science. There are also rumors of prophecies, visions that speak not only of the past but of the future. Some say the archives contain apocalyptic writings sealed away to prevent panic, texts that describe wars, disasters, the rise and fall of empires. Others believe the Church guards them not to protect the faithful, but to preserve its own power, revealing prophecies only when it chooses. To read such a text would be both intoxicating and terrifying. Imagine standing in a dim room, unrolling a scroll that foretells events centuries after it was written. Each line would pulse with dread, for to know the future is to carry a burden too heavy for most souls. Whether such writings exist or not, their possibility is enough to haunt the imagination. And then there are the relics, objects said to rest in hidden chambers beneath the Vatican. A fragment of wood from Noah's Ark, preserved under glass. A chalice whispered to be the Holy Grail, its rim worn smooth by hands that once raised it in sacred ritual. A blade so to have belonged to a saint, or a crown carried from a forgotten king. No proof has ever surfaced, yet relics speak with a power beyond words. They are tangible, physical, glowing with the aura of belief. To imagine them locked away is to imagine a hidden museum of faith and myth, where objects wait in silence, too powerful to be shown. Consider the allure of such theories. They blur the line between truth and dream, yet that blur is what gives them strength. The Vatican may never confirm nor deny them, and so imagination fills the void. Silence is fertile ground for wonder. The less we know, the more we believe. And belief, whether in lost civilizations, ancient machines, or hidden relics, carries its own kind of truth. Walk again into the imagined vault. The air is cool, heavy with centuries of stillness. You see shelves of parchment, but beyond them, doors sealed with iron. What lies behind them? A map of a world that no longer exists? A book of prophecies too terrible to share? A relic glowing faintly in the dark? The mind cannot help but wander, for mystery is irresistible. Even if none of it exists, the silence itself creates its own reality. In the absence of answers, imagination becomes truth. Theories multiply with each generation. Some claim the archives hold records of contact with beings from the stars, linking the watchers of Genesis with the gods of Mesopotamia and the angels of Christian tradition. Others insist that somewhere in those endless shelves are accounts of civilizations erased by floods, earthquakes, or fire, civilizations that rose before history and fell into legend. Whether true or not, these stories remind us that the line between myth and memory is thin. What one age calls a fable, another may one day recognize as history. The Vatican, by remaining silent, preserves not only its secrets but its mystery. And perhaps that is the greatest secret of all, that the power of the archives lies not in what they reveal, but in what they refuse to reveal. By keeping the doors locked, the Church has allowed imagination to create treasures grander than anything that may actually lie within. The silence itself is a relic, a living legend, shaping belief across centuries. As you step back from this corridor of speculation, you sense that whether the stories are true or false matters less than the fact that they endure. Legends of Atlantis, of flying chariots, of prophecies and relics survive because they speak to something deep within us. The desire for wonder, the hunger to believe that the past was stranger than we know. The Vatican may never confirm these whispers, but in silence they thrive, more alive than if they were spoken aloud. Ahead lies another chamber, one not of myth, but of reflection. For if the archives are a vault of secrets, they are also a mirror, showing us not only what was hidden, but why. The choices of censorship, the preservation of forbidden texts, the endurance of heresy and legend, they all point toward a truth deeper than any scroll. That truth is about the nature of knowledge itself, and the human need to both seek and fear it. And so the path bends again, drawing us further into the mystery, where silence becomes not only the absence of sound, but the presence of meaning. To walk through the imagined corridors of the Vatican's hidden shelves is to confront a paradox at the heart of human history. That knowledge is both the key to freedom and the seed of fear. Every manuscript, every scroll, every relic preserved in silence tells us not only about what was written, but about why it was hidden. The act of concealment reveals as much as the text itself. It shows us that the Church understood the power of ideas, and that power can be as threatening as it is inspiring. To preserve knowledge was to protect it from loss, yet to seal it was to protect humanity from questions that could destabilize faith. This is the double edge of the archive, a place that embodies both memory and silence, both guardianship and censorship. Consider the nature of knowledge itself. A story written on parchment is fragile, subject to decay, yet the idea within it can outlive empires. A single sentence can shift the way an entire generation sees the world. The Gospel of Thomas whispers that the kingdom is within you, and suddenly authority no longer rests in Rome, but in the soul of each believer. The book of Enoch describes watchers descending to earth, and suddenly heaven is not a realm above, but a place that bleeds into our own. Knowledge like this is dangerous not because it is false, but because it expands the imagination. And imagination is hard to control. The Vatican's role, then, was not only as preserver of faith, but as steward of imagination. By locking away certain texts, it sought to narrow the field of vision, to keep the faithful focused on a single story. Unity requires clarity, and clarity is easier to achieve when other voices are silenced. Yet unity achieved by silence is always fragile. Questions linger in the corners of the mind, like whispers in the dark. The very existence of a hidden archive admits that more exists than what is spoken. That admission is itself a seed of doubt, and doubt is the beginning of curiosity. Picture a scholar in the 17th century, standing before a sealed chest in the archives. He knows it contains writings excluded from the canon. He wonders what they say, what truths or lies they carry. Yet he also knows that to ask too many questions could be dangerous. The chest remains closed, but the question does not. It travels with him into his thoughts, into his prayers, into the quiet moments when certainty wavers. The archive controls access, but it cannot control imagination. This is the paradox of preservation in silence. By saving what it feared, the Church ensured that those voices would not vanish. They would sleep, but not die. And in their sleep, they grew more powerful. A forbidden text is not merely a book. It is a question in physical form, a challenge bound in leather, a whisper waiting to be heard. The more tightly it is locked, the more fiercely it calls. Knowledge, after all, is not neutral. It carries weight. It shapes the world. Galileo's telescope did not merely reveal moons, it shifted the relationship between heaven and earth. Bruno's vision of infinite worlds did not merely expand the universe, it shattered the comfort of a small cosmos where humanity held the center. Ideas such as these do not simply inform, they transform. And transformation is always unsettling. The Vatican Archives, then, can be seen as a fortress of survival. By controlling what was revealed and what was hidden, the Church endured for centuries, weathering revolutions, reformations, and scientific upheavals. But the cost of survival was silence, and silence has its own power. For silence does not erase ideas. It preserves them in shadows, where they linger until rediscovery. Think again of the discoveries at Nag Hammadi and Qumran. The texts had been hidden for centuries, yet when they surfaced, they reshaped scholarship, faith, and imagination. Their silence had not weakened them, it had strengthened them. They emerged not as dusty relics, but as revelations, powerful precisely because they had been forgotten. The Vatican's archives hold the same potential. If ever their sealed volumes were opened, the impact would be magnified by centuries of secrecy. Each word would carry the weight of silence, each revelation amplified by generations of waiting. Perhaps this is why the Vatican chooses silence still. To reveal everything might diminish the aura, make the forbidden ordinary. But to keep it hidden is to allow mystery to live, to let imagination carry the burden of wonder. Mystery itself becomes a kind of relic, one that requires no parchment or ink. The locked door is enough. Yet the paradox remains unresolved. Does the archive protect us from truths too heavy? Or does it protect itself from truths too liberating? Are we safer in silence, or are we prisoners of it? The answer depends not only on the Church, but on ourselves, on what we are willing to believe, on what questions we dare to ask. For knowledge is not a treasure stored on shelves. It is a living thing, and its power lies not in being preserved, but in being sought. As you stand in this imagined chamber, surrounded by shelves that stretch beyond sight, you feel both awe and unease. The weight of centuries presses in, yet so does the whisper of freedom. The paradox is palpable. Knowledge is both preserved and forbidden, both locked away and alive in imagination. The Vatican may guard the keys, but the questions are ours. They live not only in Rome, but in every mind that wonders what lies behind the silence. And so the journey continues. Beyond the paradox of preservation lies another corridor, one that carries us into the age of rediscovery and speculation combined. For in modern times, scholars have begun to piece together fragments of truth, uncovering not only ancient scrolls but hints of connections across cultures, myths, and civilizations. The silence of the Vatican grows louder with every discovery elsewhere. The more we find in deserts and caves, the more we wonder about the treasures still sealed behind stone. The next step leads us deeper into that wondering, into the world where archaeology, myth, and imagination converge. Every discovery outside the Vatican has only deepened the sense that something waits within. When a clay jar opens in the sands of Egypt, or a scroll emerges from a cave near the Dead Sea, the imagination turns inevitably toward Rome, to those guarded doors where silence has reigned for centuries. Archaeology does not only reveal the past, it creates echoes, and those echoes travel into the shadows of the archives. The more we find, the louder the silence becomes. In the deserts of the Middle East, fragments continue to surface, bits of parchment blackened by time, broken tablets half buried in dust, inscriptions etched into stone. Each one adds a thread to the tapestry of ancient memory. Scholars pore over them, piecing together rituals of forgotten sects, prayers whispered by communities that vanished long before cathedrals rose. They find rules for daily life, hymns sung at twilight, prophecies of messiahs that never came. These discoveries remind us that religion is never static, that it has always been shaped by a chorus of voices, some triumphant, others silenced. But with each rediscovery, the question sharpens. If such treasures lay hidden in deserts and caves, what might have been deliberately gathered by the Church and placed under lock and key? Did monks in Rome preserve the very same texts we now celebrate as miraculous finds? Did they copy them, study them, then hide them in silence while the world was told to forget? The Vatican's refusal to answer turns archaeology into myth. For every fragment found outside feels like an echo of something concealed within. Legends whisper that within those vaults rest maps unlike any known, outlines of continents drawn long before explorers set sail. Some claim these maps reveal knowledge of Antarctica, its coasts charted not under ice, but as Greenland, suggesting memory of a time when the world looked different. Others hint at star charts etched with constellations invisible to the naked eye, known somehow to ancient scribes. Are these fantasies? Perhaps. But fantasies flourish in silence, and silence is what the Vatican has mastered. The overlap of archaeology and legend can be seen in the myths of the flood. Nearly every civilization speaks of a great deluge: Mesopotamia, Greece, India, the Americas. The story of Noah is but one version of a tale that spans the globe. Archaeologists have found evidence of ancient floods, sediment layers that suggest disasters long before written history. Could it be that within the Vatican lies a record connecting these stories, a compilation of myths preserved to show their common root? A scroll describing a flood that destroyed not one culture, but many, tying humanity together in shared memory? To reveal such a document would be to admit that the Bible's flood was part of a larger pattern, a universal myth that belonged to all people. Such an admission would shake the foundations of singular authority. Better perhaps to keep it hidden, letting each culture believe its story unique. Even the fragments found by scholars seem to hint at larger secrets. A half-burned manuscript might describe angels teaching humankind forbidden arts, metallurgy, astrology, enchantments. Another fragment might speak of watchers who descended not once, but many times, shaping the rise of civilizations across ages. Archaeologists handle these with caution, interpreting them as metaphors, as poetry, as myth. But imagination hears them differently, as windows into a forgotten history where gods and mortals mingled freely. And if imagination dares to believe, it cannot help but turn again toward Rome, where such stories may rest intact, unbroken, whole. Imagine for a moment standing in one of those sealed chambers. The air is heavy, the light faint. On the table before you lies a manuscript older than nations, its ink faded but its meaning sharp. It speaks of a time when men learned to build cities from secrets given by beings who watched the stars. It describes not only temples but machines, not only prayers but instructions. Is it myth? Is it history? In that moment, the distinction dissolves. The words are alive, and they press against you with the weight of possibility. The power of the archives is not only in what they contain, but in what they suggest. Each locked box, each sealed shelf, is an invitation to wonder. And in that wonder, archaeology and legend become inseparable. The shards found in deserts are like scattered puzzle pieces, while the Vatican vaults are imagined as the box that holds the missing picture. Whether the picture exists or not matters less than the fact that we believe it might. That belief fuels the stories, the whispers, the endless fascination. For centuries, travelers to Rome have looked upon St. Peter's Basilica, upon the grandeur of the Vatican, and felt awe at what they could see. But for just as long, they have felt a deeper awe for what they could not see, the miles of shelves hidden beneath, the secrets locked away. The visible glory of the Vatican is only half the story. The invisible mystery is the other half. And together, they create an institution that commands not only faith, but imagination. As archaeology advances, as scholars unearth more fragments, the Vatican's silence grows heavier. Each rediscovery outside makes the inside seem richer, fuller, more essential. And so the archives endure as both legend and reality, both library and vault, both memory and silence. To walk in imagination through their corridors is to feel the pull of two forces: the scholar's hunger for truth and the believer's need for mystery. And perhaps that is why the silence continues. For if every book were opened, if every scroll were read, the mystery would vanish, and with it a kind of power. The Vatican may guard not only knowledge but wonder itself, knowing that in some ways questions are more enduring than answers. As you step further into this journey, the shelves seem to stretch endlessly, corridors folding into corridors, each one carrying whispers of civilizations, myths, and voices that may never again be heard. But ahead lies yet another chamber, one where silence is not only preservation, but choice, where books were not merely hidden, but judged, condemned, or even destroyed. The next step leads us deeper into the story of control, into the weight of censorship as both survival and erasure, and into the haunting question of how much of humanity's voice has been lost to silence forever. To imagine the Vatican archives only as a vault of preservation is to see only half the picture. For just as much as they kept, they also chose to erase. Silence here was not always a passive stillness, not simply the dust of time covering neglected shelves. Silence was sometimes active, sharpened like a blade, a decision made with intent. To destroy a book is to destroy a voice, to turn thought into ash, to erase not only words but possibilities. And so the archives are shadowed not only by what they contain but by what they no longer contain, by the ghosts of texts consumed in fire or condemned to vanish. Picture a medieval square filled with the smell of smoke. A pile of manuscripts lies in the center, their bindings cracking in the heat. A crowd watches as flames devour pages one by one, each curl of parchment a sigh of memory lost. For those who ordered the fire, this was an act of faith, a necessary cleansing. Better to burn heresy than to let it spread like infection. But for those who knew the words, who had touched the ink with their own hands, the fire was not only destruction, it was grief. It was the death of questions. Not every book was burned in public. Some were erased more quietly. A bishop might decree that a text should disappear, and soon enough it was gone from the shelves of monasteries, hidden in sealed boxes or walled up in chests. Centuries later, when scholars searched for them, nothing remained but rumors. This invisible censorship may have been even stronger than fire, for it left no ashes to mourn, no fragments to study. It left only silence so complete that even the memory of the words faded. The Vatican's hidden halls are haunted not only by the weight of what is there, but by the absence of what is not. Consider the Index of Forbidden Books, first published in the 16th century. It was not simply a list of titles. It was a map of fear, a declaration of what could never be known. To be placed upon it was to be erased from the world of the faithful. Philosophers, poets, scientists, all found themselves condemned. Some were names that we now honor, their works studied as cornerstones of knowledge. Yet in their own time, they were branded dangerous, their books forbidden. The index was abolished only in modern years, but its shadow remains. The memory of those forbidden voices still lingers in the air of the archives, like whispers caught in stone. Galileo's trial lives in that shadow. His books condemned, his telescope turned into evidence of heresy, his name placed on the list of the forbidden. And yet the earth still moved around the sun. Giordano Bruno's visions of infinite worlds led him not only to the index but to fire itself, his body consumed in flames that could not consume the stars he spoke of. Their words, once silenced, live now with more strength than ever, but the cost was terrible. The archives preserve records of their trials, documents written in the careful ink of authority, testimonies that once condemned but now echo as monuments to courage. To read them is to hear not only the voice of power, but the voice of defiance beneath it. The paradox is cruel. Censorship often preserved the very ideas it tried to erase. A banned book became more precious, more alive in secrecy than it might have been in freedom. Each whisper carried it further. Each act of suppression made it sharper. And yet, many voices were lost completely, erased before they could seed imagination. Their names are forgotten, their thoughts extinguished, their manuscripts destroyed so thoroughly that we will never know they existed. This is the silence more haunting than any locked vault, the silence of total erasure. Imagine again the corridors of the Vatican, shelves stretching endlessly. Between the spines of preserved manuscripts lie gaps, spaces where books should have been but are not. These are the absences that cannot be filled, the ghosts of knowledge that never returned. The silence presses against you as you walk, reminding you that history is not only about what is remembered, but also about what is forgotten on purpose. Each gap is a choice, each absence a decision made long ago, shaping what we believe today. Why was such erasure necessary? The answer is both simple and unsettling. Unity. In a world of rival empires, rival faiths, rival ideas, the Catholic Church needed one story, one voice, one truth. Diversity was dangerous. Questions were dangerous. Alternatives were dangerous. To preserve unity, they chose to silence diversity. To protect belief, they sacrificed imagination. To protect the faithful, they destroyed the voices that might have given them choice. Whether this was an act of care or control depends on the eye of the beholder, but the effect is the same. The silence remains. Yet silence, as always, has its limits. Time itself rebels. Fragments resurface, whispers escape. Discoveries in deserts and caves remind us that erasure is never complete. The very attempt to control ideas proves how powerful they are. If a book can be burned and still remembered, if a voice can be silenced and still heard, then perhaps no censorship can ever fully succeed. The archives remind us of this truth. They show us both the weight of silence and the persistence of imagination. As you stand in this imagined chamber, surrounded not only by the presence of books, but by the absence of them, you feel the paradox again. The Vatican may control the shelves, but it cannot control the longing that grows in silence. Each forbidden title, each destroyed manuscript, becomes more haunting in absence than it might have been in presence. We hunger for what is denied. We wonder about what is erased. We imagine what could have been. And imagination, once awakened, cannot be silenced. Ahead, another chamber waits, one not filled with the fire of censorship, but with the quiet courage of those who resisted it. For even in the heaviest silence, there were always seekers who dared to question, who risked everything to copy forbidden words, to speak dangerous truths, to carry whispers into the future. These are the rebels of memory, the heretics of hope, and their footsteps echo still in the Vatican's hidden halls. Not every voice was silenced, even when the weight of authority pressed like stone upon the world. For as long as there were decrees of erasure, there were those who defied them. They were not always loud revolutionaries, not always martyrs who faced fire. Sometimes they were scholars who copied a text by candlelight, monks who whispered questions in cloisters, travelers who carried fragments across borders in hidden satchels. They lived in the shadows, moving quietly, but their defiance shaped the survival of ideas that might otherwise have died. Imagine a medieval scriptorium at midnight. The walls are cold, the air thick with the smell of ink and wax. A single figure bends over a page, quill scratching, eyes darting to the door with every creak of wood. He is copying a forbidden gospel, a text condemned by Rome but too beautiful, too strange to let vanish. Every line he writes is an act of rebellion. If discovered, he will be punished, but still his hand does not stop. Centuries later, the copy he makes may surface in a monastery library or in the hands of a collector, a living witness to his quiet courage. His name is forgotten, but his labor endures. Others resisted through words spoken in confidence. A priest might murmur to a trusted friend, "There are more gospels than 4. A monk might suggest in hushed tones that the earth is older than the Bible declares. Such whispers were fragile, like smoke in the wind, yet they spread. Each whisper planted doubt, and doubt, once planted, grows into curiosity. The archives may have locked away forbidden texts, but the human voice is harder to silence than parchment. Some who resisted became famous, remembered by history as heretics, martyrs, visionaries. Giordano Bruno, burned for his vision of infinite worlds. Galileo, condemned for the heresy of truth written in the stars. Their names are carved into memory, their courage remembered. But countless others lived and died in obscurity, their bravery marked only by the survival of ideas that outlived them. Without them, entire worlds of thought might have vanished, consumed by silence. Consider the courage it must have taken to question the Church openly in the Middle Ages. A scholar might stand before a bishop and ask why certain books were excluded from the canon. A priest might wonder aloud why women could not teach when Mary herself was remembered in some texts as a bearer of wisdom. To ask such questions was to risk everything: exile, imprisonment, even death. Yet still questions were asked. The silence was never complete, for curiosity cannot be erased. The archives themselves bear traces of this defiance. Among the records of trials and condemnations are the words of those who refused to recant. Their testimonies, though written to condemn them, now preserve their voices. Reading them is like hearing whispers across centuries, voices that dared to imagine a different truth. Some spoke of visions, others of philosophies, still others of simple doubts. Together they form a chorus of defiance, reminding us that even in the darkest silence, sparks of curiosity burned. Picture again the hidden corridors of the archives. Alongside papal decrees and royal letters are the records of these trials, ink on parchment, written by scribes who may have despised the words they preserved. Yet by writing them down, they ensured those words survived. Authority sought to silence, but in preserving the condemnation, it preserved the condemned. Heresy, once spoken, cannot be unspoken. It lingers in the air, in memory, in imagination. In this way, silence became porous. The Vatican could lock away texts, burn manuscripts, issue decrees, but ideas slipped through cracks. A copy smuggled out, a rumor passed along, a scholar who remembered too well to forget. Knowledge is a living thing. It resists chains. Even when bound, it waits. And when the moment comes, it rises again. The courage of these quiet rebels shows us something profound, that the search for truth is not always loud, not always public. Sometimes it is as simple as a question whispered in the dark, as fragile as a manuscript hidden in a wall, as patient as a scroll waiting in silence for centuries. Their resistance reminds us that curiosity is not only rebellion, it is also hope. Hope that the world can be larger than it seems, that the divine can be broader than decrees allow, that truth can outlive those who try to bury it. And so the archives, though built to silence, also preserve the memory of defiance. Within their walls rest not only the voices of authority, but the echoes of those who challenged it. Together they form a dialogue, a conversation across centuries between power and curiosity, control and imagination. To walk in imagination through those corridors is to hear both voices at once, the command of silence and the whisper of defiance. As you leave this chamber of rebels and seekers, the air feels charged, alive with sparks that refuse to die. The Vatican may have sought to guard unity through silence, but unity never erased diversity. It only buried it, and what is buried often returns stronger. The 20th century proved this when deserts and caves gave back voices thought lost forever. Rediscovery is rebellion of another kind, not by heretics but by chance, by time itself breaking silence. And as discoveries continue, the Vatican's vaults grow heavier with their own silence, their locked doors echoing louder with each fragment found elsewhere. Ahead lies the story of those rediscoveries, not only of Nag Hammadi and Qumran, but of countless smaller finds, fragments that together remind us that silence is never final. The world is filled with hidden libraries, buried manuscripts, forgotten chests waiting to be opened. Each discovery outside Rome is a reminder that what is hidden within Rome may yet see light. And with each rediscovery, the question grows louder. How much longer can silence endure before it must break? The story of rediscovery did not end with the jars of Nag Hammadi or the caves of Qumran. Those were the great revelations, celebrated in headlines, studied in universities, debated in seminaries. But in quieter corners of the world, in monasteries, libraries, and even private collections, other fragments began to surface. They were not always dramatic, sometimes no more than a torn page, a faded scrap of parchment, a half-burned codex discovered behind stone walls. Yet each fragment was a spark, proof that silence can never be perfect, that what is buried finds a way back into the light. Scholars in the 20th century often found themselves chasing rumors. A rumor of a forgotten manuscript in the library of a remote monastery in Ethiopia. A rumor of a parchment hidden in the attic of a church in Armenia. A rumor of scrolls purchased by collectors in Cairo, wrapped in linen for centuries, sold in back alleys. Some of these rumors proved true. A single scrap of papyrus, covered in Greek script, might reveal a saying of Jesus not found in any canon. Another fragment might carry a psalm once sung by a community erased by time. Each discovery, however small, expanded the chorus of voices, reminding us that faith was always wider, richer, more complex than the official story. The Dead Sea Scrolls themselves continued to yield secrets for decades. As scholars pieced together fragments, they found not only scripture, but also rules of communities, prayers of longing, apocalyptic visions of light and darkness. Some scrolls spoke of messianic figures who would rise not once but many times. Others hinted at conflicts between angels and forces of shadow, stories that blurred the line between myth and theology. To read them was to realize that the world before Christianity was alive with expectation, with dreams of salvation, with visions of heaven spilling into earth. The Bible we know is only one thread woven from this larger fabric. Meanwhile, other discoveries unfolded far from the deserts. In 1972, fragments of Gnostic texts appeared in Brussels, smuggled from Egypt, offering still more voices once silenced. In the decades that followed, archaeologists stumbled upon inscriptions in ruined temples, papyri preserved in dry sands, codices forgotten in ancient libraries. Some were scholarly treasures, studied carefully, catalogued, published. Others slipped quietly into private hands, their contents whispered about but never fully revealed. The sense grew that history is alive, that the past refuses to vanish. Each rediscovery deepened the mystery of the Vatican's silence. For if caves and deserts could hold such treasures for millennia, what must lie in Rome, preserved deliberately rather than by chance? Scholars asked the question openly, journalists speculated, seekers wondered. The Vatican gave no answer, its silence growing louder with each new find. And in that silence, imagination flourished. Perhaps the archives contained their own versions of the Dead Sea Scrolls, or even texts never glimpsed outside. Perhaps the Church had hidden its own fragments of Gospels, apocalypses, or myths, guarding them from a world it judged unready. Picture a small fragment of parchment discovered in a monastery library, its Greek letters faint but clear. It speaks of a vision where the soul rises through heavens, passing guardians at each gate, shedding burdens of flesh until it stands radiant before the divine. Such imagery may not belong to the canon, but it reveals the richness of early Christian imagination, the variety of ways people envisioned salvation. Multiply this fragment by hundreds, by thousands, and you begin to glimpse the diversity of faith that once existed. The Vatican's silence looms larger in this light, for it suggests that within its walls might rest not scraps, but complete texts, voices intact, waiting. Rediscovery also reshaped how we see history. For centuries, Christianity was taught as a single unified voice. The discoveries of Nag Hammadi, Qumran, and beyond proved otherwise. Early Christianity was not one river, but many streams, flowing together, diverging, converging again. Some streams were silenced, others preserved, but all were part of the landscape. To realize this is to realize that history is not fixed but chosen, shaped by decisions of councils, bishops, and scribes. The archives embody this truth. They remind us that for every book we read, there are others we do not, others we may never. But rediscovery is not only about the past, it is also about the present. Each new fragment challenges us to see faith differently, to question assumptions, to open our minds, and each rediscovery increases the weight of silence within Rome. For the more we know from outside, the more we suspect about what lies inside. The Vatican's vaults become not only a place of history, but a place of possibility, where imagination runs wild with visions of what might be revealed. Imagine standing at the threshold of those locked doors, knowing that deserts and caves have given us only glimpses. Behind the Vatican's walls may rest entire worlds of thought, sealed in silence. A gospel where Judas is not traitor but chosen. a text where Mary teaches wisdom equal to the apostles, a scroll that speaks of watchers, giants, gods who walked the earth. Perhaps they are myths, perhaps metaphors, perhaps truths. The silence does not say. But the silence itself is a kind of answer, for it tells us that the Vatican fears not only what is written, but what might be believed if it were known. And so the rediscoveries outside and the silence inside form a strange dialogue. Each fragment unearthed in the desert makes the vaults seem fuller. Each silence in Rome makes the fragments shine brighter. Together they create a tension that fuels both scholarship and imagination, both faith and doubt. As you leave this imagined landscape of rediscovery, you carry with you the paradox once more. Knowledge cannot be destroyed, only delayed. Silence cannot erase, only postpone. What has been hidden may one day return, and when it does, it will change us. The next chamber in our journey leads us deeper into this tension, into the world of speculation, where the line between archaeology and legend blurs completely. For alongside rediscovery rises imagination, and imagination creates its own truths. It fills the silence with visions of lost civilizations, forgotten technologies, and relics that shape not only the past but the future. Speculation has always been the natural companion of silence. Where words end, imagination begins. And nowhere has imagination worked harder than in the shadows of the Vatican's hidden shelves. For centuries, people have looked at the locked doors and asked not only what is behind them, but what could be behind them. The lack of answers turns absence into possibility, and possibility into legend. In this way, the archives have become more than a library. They have become a canvas upon which humanity paints its deepest longings and fears. One of the most enduring legends is the idea that the archives preserve knowledge of civilizations that rose and fell long before history remembers. Atlantis, described by Plato as a mighty island swallowed by the sea, has inspired seekers for over 2 millennia. Some imagine the Vatican holds scrolls brought from Greece, or even older sources, that describe the island in detail, its cities, its technology, its downfall. To hold such documents would be to hold proof that humanity's story stretches further back than we know, that memory reaches deeper than textbooks allow. Skeptics dismiss it as allegory, yet the silence of Rome leaves the door open for wonder. Beyond Atlantis lies a web of other possible civilizations erased by time, empires swallowed by floods, cultures consumed by fire, cities lost beneath oceans. Archaeology has revealed fragments that hint at these possibilities. Structures beneath the waters of Yonaguni in Japan, ruins along the coasts of India, vast megaliths in South America whose builders remain mysterious. Some whisper that the Vatican has long known of these sites, perhaps even preserving ancient maps that connect them, maps that suggest the ancients had a knowledge of the world far beyond what history teaches. To imagine such a map rolled into a scroll and locked away in Rome is to imagine history itself rewritten. Equally captivating are the stories of forbidden technologies. Ancient Sanskrit writings describe vimanas, flying chariots that crossed the skies like birds of fire. Greek myths tell of gods wielding thunderbolts, of weapons so powerful they leveled cities. To modern eyes, these are metaphors. To the imagination, they may be memories of real machines, technologies forgotten but once known. Some say the Vatican archives contain commentaries or fragments linking these myths. documents suggesting they were not just allegories, but echoes of truth. Picture a manuscript in Latin describing a chariot of the sky, translated from a Sanskrit original by a puzzled scribe centuries ago. Such a text, if revealed, would collapse the barrier between myth and history. Then there are the prophecies, perhaps the most haunting of all. Whispers claim the archives contain writings that look not only backward but forward, visions of the end of days, of wars and disasters, of empires rising and falling. Some imagine these texts are locked away to protect the faithful from fear. Others that the Church holds them to preserve control, choosing when and how to reveal them. Imagine unrolling a scroll that describes events centuries after it was written, each line heavy with the suggestion of inevitability. Would it inspire awe or despair? To read the future might be to lose the freedom of choice, yet the possibility of such texts stirs unease, for the unknown always holds power. Theories of relics add yet another layer. Rumors whisper of fragments of Noah's Ark resting under glass, of chalices linked to the Holy Grail, of weapons carried by saints. Whether true or not, the idea is irresistible. Relics are different from texts. They are tangible, physical, capable of being touched. They glow with the weight of belief even when history cannot confirm them. To imagine a hidden chamber in Rome filled with such objects is to imagine a secret museum of the sacred, a vault where myth and faith converge in silence. Skeptics argue that none of these treasures exist, that the Vatican's archives are filled mostly with mundane records, letters, decrees, inventories. Yet even skeptics cannot deny the power of silence. For the absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence, and the Vatican has built its strength upon that uncertainty. The locked doors create more fascination than open shelves ever could. And in that fascination, humanity continues to dream. Why do these legends endure? Perhaps because they reveal something deeper than the facts themselves. They show us our hunger for wonder, our refusal to accept that the world is ordinary. They remind us that history is as much about imagination as memory. Whether or not the Vatican holds records of Atlantis, or diagrams of ancient machines, or prophecies of the end, the belief that it might shapes how we see the past. And belief, even without proof, carries its own kind of truth. Picture once more the corridors of the imagined archive. You pass shelves of parchment, but your eyes are drawn to doors sealed with iron. Behind them, you imagine, lies a chamber where relics rest on velvet, where scrolls glow in lamplight, where secrets too powerful for daylight sleep in silence. You do not know what is behind those doors. No one does. But the silence makes you believe there must be something extraordinary, something that explains the weight you feel in the air. That belief is itself part of the archive, a living presence that grows stronger with every unanswered question. Speculation does not diminish the Vatican's mystery. It strengthens it. By refusing to speak, the Church allows imagination to speak louder, to create treasures grander than anything that may actually exist. Perhaps this is intentional. Perhaps the greatest power of the archives is not in what they hold, but in what they inspire. For silence itself is a relic, a sacred object, shaping faith and wonder alike. As you leave this corridor of speculation, you sense that you have walked not only through imagined chambers, but through the human mind itself. The archives mirror us, reflecting our deepest fears and brightest dreams. They show us not only what the Church may have hidden, but what we long to find. Ahead lies yet another passage, one that carries us away from speculation and back toward reflection, toward the larger truth hidden in the silence. That knowledge is endless, that questions outlive answers, and that mystery itself is part of the human soul. Silence is not only absence, it is also presence, heavy and alive, shaping how we think even when nothing is spoken. The Vatican Archives embody this paradox more than any other place in the world. Their locked doors hold not only manuscripts and relics, but also an atmosphere, a kind of gravity that draws imagination toward them. In that gravity, we see something profound, that mystery itself is a form of power. Without mystery, stories lose their aura, history loses its wonder, and faith loses its depth. Perhaps this is why silence endures, not merely because secrets are dangerous, but because mystery itself is necessary. Think of how we encounter the world. Knowledge explains, but it also reduces. When we measure the stars, we lose the infinite awe that ancient eyes felt beneath the night sky. When we dissect a miracle, we turn it into a mechanism. Explanation satisfies the mind, but mystery feeds the soul. The Vatican, whether intentionally or by circumstance, has preserved mystery by preserving silence. By not revealing everything, it has allowed questions to remain larger than answers. And in questions, faith survives. Consider a pilgrim entering St. Peter's Basilica, standing beneath the great dome painted by Michelangelo. The pilgrim feels awe, not because every detail is understood, but because the vastness overwhelms. The same is true of the archives. Their power lies not in what we know of them, but in what we do not. To imagine miles of shelves filled with forbidden gospels, ancient myths, or relics of saints is to feel the same awe as standing under the dome, a sense that the world is larger than we can grasp. The Vatican's silence, like Michelangelo's dome, creates a space where imagination rises upward, toward the unknown. Philosophers have long debated the nature of knowledge and mystery. Some argued that truth must always be revealed, that nothing should remain hidden. Others believed that certain truths are too heavy, too dangerous, or too sacred to be spoken. In practice, humanity has lived between these two poles, revealing some things and concealing others. The archives are the perfect image of this balance, a place that both preserves and hides, both protects and denies. Their silence suggests that mystery is not a weakness, but a design, a deliberate choice woven into the fabric of faith and history. Imagine for a moment that every book were opened, every scroll unrolled, every relic displayed. At first, the revelation would dazzle. Scholars would celebrate, seekers would marvel, the faithful would gasp. But soon the wonder would fade. Mystery, once explained, becomes history. And history, though important, does not feed the soul in the same way. The absence of answers allows each of us to imagine, to dream, to project our own questions into the silence. In this way, the Vatican's locked doors do not only conceal, they invite. They invite us to wonder, to speculate, to seek. Mystery also has another role. It protects. Not everything is meant for everyone at once. Some truths require preparation. A fragment that questions authority might inspire rebellion before it inspires reflection. A prophecy of disaster might cause panic before it causes wisdom. By hiding some things, the Church may not only have protected itself, but also humanity from truths it was not yet ready to bear. Whether this was an act of control or compassion cannot be answered easily. Perhaps it was both. But the result is the same. Silence preserved mystery, and mystery preserved order. Yet silence is not eternal. Time wears at it, as rivers wear at stone. Rediscoveries in deserts and caves remind us that what is hidden will one day return. The Dead Sea Scrolls slept for 2 millennia, and then they woke. The Nag Hammadi texts lay in jars for centuries, and then they spoke again. The same may be true for the Vatican's vaults. Whether by accident, by rebellion, or by choice, some of what sleeps in silence may one day rise into the light. When it does, the world will change, not only because of the words themselves, but because silence will have given them weight. This is the paradox of mystery. It both conceals and reveals. It frustrates us, yet it draws us in. It silences, yet it keeps alive. Without mystery, the world would feel smaller, flatter, emptier. With it, the world feels vast, layered, alive with echoes. The Vatican Archives, then, are not only a place of secrecy. They are a symbol of humanity's need for the unknown, our instinct to preserve wonder even as we seek truth. Picture again the corridors of the imagined archive. You walk between endless shelves, each one filled with books you cannot open. The silence is not empty. It is charged, alive with possibilities. Every closed volume feels like a question, every locked chest like a door into another world. The weight of centuries presses down, but so does the thrill of curiosity. You realize that the silence itself is the treasure. It is what makes the archives endure, not only as a library but as a legend. As you step deeper into this reflection, you sense that the archives mirror not only history, but the human soul. We too preserve and conceal. We too have shelves of memory where certain things are hidden, not destroyed, but locked away. We too carry mysteries, questions we may never answer but cannot stop asking. In this way, the Vatican's silence is not only about the Church, it is about us, about our need to balance knowledge and wonder, truth and mystery. And so the journey continues. Beyond reflection lies yet another chamber, one that carries us back to the figures who lived at the edge of this silence. Scholars, seekers, rebels who risked everything to question what was hidden. They remind us that while mystery feeds the soul, courage feeds the future. Their voices still echo in the archives, preserved by the very silence that sought to erase them. Ahead lies their story, and with it the reminder that curiosity, once born, can never be silenced. Every age produces its seekers, men and women who refuse to stop at the edge of silence. They are drawn to what lies hidden, restless in the face of locked doors. Some seek out of faith, others out of doubt, and many out of both at once. Their footsteps cross the boundary between reverence and rebellion, and in those footsteps we hear the pulse of history. Without them, the forbidden would remain forgotten. With them, whispers become echoes that survive across centuries. Picture a Renaissance scholar wandering through Rome, his robes heavy with dust from libraries and his mind alive with curiosity. He has heard rumors of books kept in the Vatican that speak of lost gospels, ancient myths, heresies written in ink and locked in silence. He longs to see them, to touch them, to copy them, but access is nearly impossible. The archives admit only a chosen few, and even then, only to certain volumes. And yet, the scholar finds fragments elsewhere, in monasteries, in private collections, in markets where scraps of parchment are sold like relics. Piece by piece, he begins to reconstruct a larger story, one that hints at what Rome conceals. His work may never be finished, but the questions he raises survive long after his death. Others sought not in libraries, but in the stars. Galileo looked through his telescope and saw moons orbiting Jupiter, evidence that the heavens were not fixed as the Church proclaimed. His discovery was a form of forbidden knowledge, not pulled from a manuscript but written in the sky itself. For daring to read it, he was condemned. Yet his vision endured, carried forward by seekers who continued to look upward. The archives still hold the records of his trial, pages filled with accusations and defenses. They are meant to show his error, but today they show his courage. The Vatican preserved his condemnation, but in doing so preserved his voice as well. In monasteries across Europe, monks became quiet rebels. Some copied forbidden texts in secret, hiding them within walls or beneath floorboards. Others translated them into languages more people could understand, spreading them carefully among trusted hands. Imagine a monk in a stone cell, bent over a parchment that tells a story of Jesus outside the canon, a story that presents him not only as Savior, but as teacher of hidden wisdom. The monk copies each word with trembling hands, aware that discovery could cost him everything. Yet he continues, believing that truth, whatever it is, deserves survival. Centuries later, perhaps that manuscript resurfaces, proof of one man's defiance. There were also seekers outside the church, travelers who carried stories across borders. A merchant might bring back tales of strange texts from the East, scrolls filled with cosmologies that echoed but did not match Christian scripture. A diplomat might return from Constantinople with whispers of gospels preserved by communities outside Rome's authority. Each fragment, each rumor, added fuel to curiosity. The Vatican's silence could not contain the flow of stories that crossed oceans and deserts. Ideas are migratory, carried not only in books but in memory, in whispers, in imagination. The cost of seeking was often high. To be accused of heresy was to stand at the edge of exile, imprisonment, or death. The word itself carried a weight that could crush reputations and lives. Yet seekers continued, driven by something stronger than fear. Perhaps it was hope. The hope that knowledge could bring humanity closer to the divine. Perhaps it was defiance, the refusal to let authority define the boundaries of truth. Perhaps it was simple curiosity, the desire to know what lay behind silence. Whatever the reason, they kept asking, kept searching, kept risking. The archives bear silent witness to their courage. Among the papal decrees and royal letters are trial records filled with the voices of seekers. Some defended their questions with eloquence, others with desperate pleas. Some refused to recant, embracing martyrdom. Others yielded under pressure, but their words had already been spoken, already preserved. These records, meant to condemn, now preserve the very curiosity they sought to erase. They remind us that even in defeat, seekers left their mark. Think again of Giordano Bruno, burned for imagining an infinite cosmos. His vision was too vast for his time, but it was not erased. It lived in memory, in rumor, in the archives themselves. Today we look at the stars and know he was right, that the universe is larger than any doctrine can contain. His death was meant to silence him, but instead it immortalized him. The archives that hold the record of his trial hold also the echo of his defiance, a defiance that time has vindicated. In this way, the Vatican silence became both obstacle and ally. It sought to suppress, but in preserving its own condemnations, it preserved the condemned. The seekers may have been silenced in life, but in death they speak still, their voices carried forward by the very institution that sought to erase them. The irony is sharp, but it is also hopeful. It shows us that silence is never perfect, that even the most powerful walls cannot contain the human hunger for truth. As you walk in imagination through these corridors, you hear not only the silence of forbidden books, but also the footsteps of seekers echoing faintly in the distance. They remind you that curiosity is older than censorship, stronger than fear, and more enduring than fire. Ideas are stubborn. Once born, they cannot be killed. They wait in fragments, in whispers, in shadows, until the time comes for them to rise again. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of the seekers, that to ask is itself an act of preservation. Even if answers are denied, the question survives. And questions, passed from one generation to the next, keep knowledge alive. The Vatican archives, for all their silence, are filled with the memory of such questions, waiting still in ink and parchment, in rumor and legend. As you leave this chamber of seekers, you sense that their story is not finished. The world continues to discover, to unearth, to rediscover fragments once thought lost, and with each discovery the seekers return, vindicated in their curiosity. The next chamber leads us into that modern age of rediscovery once more, into the world where hidden libraries, desert scrolls, and forgotten manuscripts remind us that silence is never final, and that knowledge, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way back into the light. The 20th century did not only unearth ancient manuscripts from deserts and caves, it opened a new era of rediscovery that continues into our own time. Each fragment that surfaced was like a spark in the dark, illuminating corners of history once thought lost. And with every spark, eyes turned again toward Rome, toward the Vatican's sealed vaults, asking what else might still be waiting in silence. The paradox grew sharper. The more we found outside, the more we suspected inside. Consider the impact of the Dead Sea Scrolls. When the first scrolls were studied in the late 1940s and 1950s, scholars realized they were handling the oldest biblical manuscripts ever discovered, some written centuries before the Common Era. Their words revealed a world of diversity, multiple versions of Scripture, variations of familiar stories, prayers and rules preserved by communities outside the mainstream. To the faithful, they confirmed the deep antiquity of sacred texts. To scholars, they proved that Scripture was never static but evolving, shaped by different voices over time. Suddenly, the neat lines of tradition blurred and history expanded. At the same time, the Nag Hammadi texts offered a vision of Christianity far wider than the canon. Gospels filled with secret sayings, treatises that spoke of salvation as knowledge, visions of cosmic battles between light and darkness, all painted a picture of early faith as diverse, poetic, and at times unsettling. For centuries, the Church had called these writings heresy. Now they returned as history, undeniable and alive. Their survival proved that suppression is never final. But discoveries did not end there. In monasteries across the Middle East, scholars found manuscripts hidden in walls, preserved in jars, or forgotten in corners of dusty libraries. In 1972, Gnostic texts surfaced in Brussels, smuggled from Egypt, offering still more voices once silenced. In later decades, fragments of papyrus appeared in markets, sometimes authentic, sometimes forged, yet always hinting at the possibility of more. Each discovery, no matter how small, carried weight. A single line, written in Greek or Coptic, could reveal a vision of Jesus unfamiliar to tradition, a teaching preserved by a community erased by time. Modern technology added another layer. Multispectral imaging allowed scholars to read texts invisible to the naked eye, recovering words from burned or faded manuscripts. Suddenly, scrolls once thought unreadable revealed themselves. Hidden lines of ancient texts glowed under new light, as if silence itself was surrendering. Each rediscovery reminded us that knowledge does not vanish. It waits for the right moment to return. And through it all, the Vatican remained silent. Scholars and journalists could not help but wonder. If deserts and caves gave us such treasures, what might the Vatican's deliberate vaults contain? If fragments could reshape our understanding, what could complete manuscripts do? The silence became more than mystery. It became a kind of pressure, pressing on the imagination, pressing on scholarship, pressing on faith. The absence of answers was itself an answer, though not the one anyone could confirm. Imagine a modern scholar walking through a desert site, brushing sand from a piece of papyrus. The thrill of discovery runs through his hands. The words are faint but legible, and they change everything he thought he knew about early Christianity. He publishes, debates erupt, history shifts. Now imagine that same scholar thinking of Rome, of shelves where similar or greater treasures may already rest, preserved for centuries, yet withheld. The contrast is unbearable. One world reveals by accident, the other conceals by choice. One stumbles upon fragments, the other sits upon miles of intact texts. Together they create a tension that fuels endless speculation. Rediscovery has also reached beyond manuscripts. Archaeologists uncover ruins of temples, altars, inscriptions, artifacts that whisper of forgotten rituals. Each discovery adds context to ancient texts, proving that myths often grow from roots of history. A flood remembered in scripture aligns with geological evidence of ancient deluges. A story of watchers aligns with myths of sky beings found across cultures. The more archaeology reveals, the more the silences of the archives seem filled with meaning. In our own century, discoveries continue. A forgotten codex turns up in a private collection. A fragment surfaces in an auction house. A half-burned manuscript reveals new lines under imaging. Each time, the same thought returns. If chance can give us this, what would happen if silence broke in Rome? The Vatican does not answer. Its doors remain closed, its shelves untouched by public eyes. And yet, in silence, imagination grows stronger. Perhaps this is the greatest irony. Every rediscovery outside increases the power of silence inside. Each fragment found makes the vaults feel fuller. Each question asked makes the silence feel louder. The archives may never reveal their secrets, but they do not need to. Their mystery lives in the tension itself, in the contrast between what we know and what we suspect. And so we live in two worlds at once. In one, archaeology and scholarship continue to uncover fragments, patiently piecing together humanity's past. In the other, the Vatican's vaults loom in silence, feeding imagination with the promise of what might be. Together, they form a mirror. One reveals by chance, the other conceals by choice. Between them, mystery thrives. As you step away from the desert sands and back into the imagined corridors of Rome, you feel the paradox pressing more heavily than ever. The silence is not empty. It is crowded with questions. Every rediscovery outside adds another echo inside, another voice demanding to be heard. Ahead lies the final stretch of this journey, where reflection deepens, where the archives cease to be only a place in Rome and become a symbol of something greater, the eternal dance between knowledge and mystery, truth and silence, faith and imagination. The further we wander through the imagined corridors of the Vatican's forbidden shelves, the clearer it becomes that their true weight lies not only in what they hold, but in what they mean. The silence of the archives is more than institutional secrecy. It is a mirror held up to humanity. In their silence, we see our own fear of questions too sharp, our own hunger for answers too heavy, our own uneasy dance between knowledge and wonder. The archives do not simply conceal books. They embody the paradox of being human, the need to know and the need to believe, the desire for certainty and the yearning for mystery. Consider how we speak of secrets. A secret is never neutral. It is a force. It shapes those who know it and those who do not. The very act of hiding something gives it power. The Vatican's secrets, whether they are mundane records of taxes or legends of angels and giants, are powerful not only because of their content, but because of their concealment. A tax record may be dull on its own, but sealed in a vault for centuries, it becomes part of a legend. A scroll about fallen angels may be myth, but hidden away it becomes proof, at least in imagination, of forbidden truths. The silence transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary, the fragment into the treasure, the rumor into the revelation. This is why the archives endure as a symbol. They are not only shelves of parchment, but a stage upon which humanity projects its deepest dramas. On one side stands control, the attempt to shape knowledge, to limit diversity, to guard unity. On the other side stands curiosity, the endless human hunger to ask, to question, to dream. Between them lies silence, heavy and unresolved. To walk the corridors in imagination is to walk between these forces, feeling both the gravity of order and the pull of wonder. The silence also teaches us about the cost of unity. To keep one story alive, many others were silenced. To preserve a single voice of faith, countless voices were locked away. Was this sacrifice necessary? Perhaps. Unity gave strength to a fragile church, stability to a chaotic world. But the cost was diversity. The cost was imagination. The cost was the possibility of different paths. When we look at the archives, we are reminded that history is not inevitable. It is chosen. It is shaped by decisions, decrees, and silences. And in those silences lie the shadows of what could have been. Yet the archives also show us the resilience of ideas. For even when silenced, voices endure. A text locked in a vault still exists, waiting. A book burned still whispers in rumor. A heretic condemned still speaks through trial records preserved by those who condemned him. Silence is never final. It delays, it reshapes, but it cannot erase completely. The Vatican's silence proves not the weakness of knowledge, but its strength. If knowledge can survive even centuries of concealment, then it is stronger than the walls that seek to contain it. Picture again the shelves stretching endlessly in the dark. You imagine scrolls written by forgotten hands, relics glowing faintly in glass, maps that suggest worlds lost. Perhaps they are there, perhaps not. What matters is that you wonder. The act of wondering is itself the treasure. It shows that the archives are not only in Rome, but in us, in the questions we carry, in the mysteries we preserve in our own silence. Each of us has archives of memory, of longing, of curiosity, filled with doors we may never open. The Vatican is only the grandest mirror of this human truth. As we reflect on these corridors, the idea emerges that perhaps the archives are less about secrets and more about survival. The Church endured by guarding unity, by controlling voices, by preserving even what it condemned. And humanity endures by imagining, by questioning, by dreaming of what lies beyond. The balance between silence and curiosity is what has carried us through centuries. Without silence, we would drown in chaos. Without curiosity, we would stagnate in certainty. The archives hold both, bound together, inseparable. And so their silence becomes a lesson. It tells us that truth is endless, that no single story can contain it, that no vault can silence it. It tells us that mystery is necessary, that wonder is as vital as certainty, that questions are as important as answers. It tells us that we live not in a world of finished truths, but in a world of whispers, echoes, fragments, rediscoveries. The Vatican's hidden shelves remind us that history is alive, that faith is layered, and that imagination is eternal. As you step through the final imagined corridors, you feel the silence pressing but no longer as burden. It feels instead like invitation. Each locked door says, ask. Each sealed chest says, imagine. Each absent voice says, seek. The archives are not only Rome's possession, they belong to all who wonder, all who listen, all who refuse to let silence be the end. The journey is almost at its close, yet one final chamber remains. It is not filled with scrolls or relics, but with reflection, with the echo of everything we have walked through. It asks us to consider what the archives truly are, not only miles of parchment, but a mirror of the human soul. In them we see the endless tension between power and imagination, between unity and diversity, between silence and truth. And in that tension lies not despair, but meaning. We return now to where the journey began, to the image of shelves stretching endlessly in the dark, to the heavy silence that both conceals and reveals. After walking through the imagined corridors of the Vatican's forbidden vaults, we find ourselves not at the end, but at a threshold, standing between history and legend, between what is known and what will forever remain a question. The archives are no longer only a place in Rome. They have become a symbol, a reflection of our own longing for knowledge and our own fear of what knowledge might bring. Think again of the countless hands that wrote the words preserved there. Scribes bent over parchment, monks scratching by candlelight, philosophers scribbling in the margins of banned books, explorers sketching maps of new worlds. Their voices reach us not through sound, but through silence, preserved by the very act of concealment. We do not know all their names, but we know their presence. They live in every fragment, every rumor, every whisper. Their survival tells us something profound, that ideas are stronger than the walls that try to contain them, stronger than the flames that try to consume them, stronger than the silence that tries to erase them. The archives remind us of the paradox of human history, that what is hidden often survives longer than what is revealed, that silence can sometimes preserve better than proclamation. The Gospels excluded from the canon still echo, perhaps louder than they would have if they had been accepted. The heretics condemned in their own time shine as martyrs in ours. The myths locked away as dangerous grow into legends that inspire generations. Silence, intended to erase, has become the soil in which imagination thrives. And so we stand at the edge of mystery, realizing that perhaps the greatest secret of the archives is not what they contain, but what they inspire. They make us ask. They make us wonder. They make us dream of Atlantis, of watchers and giants, of gospels where Judas is chosen, of scrolls that foretell the future, of relics glowing in hidden chambers. Even if none of these things lie within, the power of the archives remains. For silence itself is a kind of text, one that we all read in our own way. This journey has taken us through fire and ashes, through whispers of heresy and rediscoveries in desert sands, through legends of forbidden machines and prophecies sealed in vaults. At each step, we have seen that the archives are not merely shelves of books, but a mirror of humanity. They show us our desire for certainty and our hunger for mystery, our fear of chaos and our love of questions, our longing for unity and our need for diversity. In the silence of the Vatican, we hear the silence of our own souls, the things we hide, the things we seek, the things we cannot bear to forget. Imagine once more that you stand before a locked door in the heart of Rome. Behind it, miles of shelves wait in darkness. You cannot open it. You may never open it. Yet in standing there, you feel the weight of centuries pressing, the voices of the past whispering, the questions of the future rising. You realize that the locked door is not a barrier, but an invitation. It invites you to imagine, to seek, to listen. It invites you to carry the mystery forward, to keep alive the questions that have no final answers. Perhaps one day the archives will open fully. Perhaps their secrets will spill into the light, and the world will gasp at what has been preserved. Or perhaps they will never open, remaining forever a vault of silence. But either way, their power endures. For the mystery is not in the books themselves, but in us, in the way we respond to silence, in the way we carry wonder. Even if every scroll were read, even if every relic were displayed, questions would remain. And questions are the true treasures, for they are endless. As this journey comes to a close, you are left not with certainty, but with curiosity, not with answers, but with wonder. The Vatican's hidden shelves remind us that history is never complete, that knowledge is never final, that silence is never empty. They remind us that to be human is to live in mystery, to walk through corridors of questions, to listen for whispers in the dark. And in that listening, we find not despair, but comfort. For in mystery, we are never alone. We are surrounded by the voices of those who came before, voices that still wait, still whisper, still endure. So let the silence remain. Let the archives sleep. Let the shelves stretch endlessly in imagination. For the true secret is not what lies behind the doors, but the wonder that stirs when we dare to ask. And in that wonder, the past speaks again, softly but persistently, carrying us forward into the endless night of history, where mystery is not an obstacle, but a companion.